Welcome back to Deano's Garage. This is the Honda MSX 125, or the Grom as it's more affectionately known as. I'm going to make a bold claim. You're about to watch the best, most insightful, most detailed, most specific oil change service that you can do on the Honda Grom.
Say what?
Don't believe me? Stay tuned to Deano's Garage. Welcome back to Deano's Garage for the MSX 125, or as it's more affectionately known as, the Grom. Now today what we're going to be doing is changing the oil. I've only had this bike a little while. It's done 656 miles, or had when I first got it, just a little over that at the moment. So it is due its first service at around 600 miles. So what we're going to be doing is dropping out the old oil and adding this 10W30, and this oil is not fully synthetic. Now I have seen on a lot of reviews and things and forums people saying to use fully synthetic oil. This bike has a wet clutch system. Not a great idea to be using fully synthetic oil, because what can happen is the clutch plates will absorb that fully synthetic oil and then you can end up with clutch slip. So stick to what the manual says, 10W30. This is a really good quality oil from Castrol, and it is not fully synthetic. So let's get on and do this oil change. So the first thing we're going to be doing is warming the engine up. Allow it to warm up for about sort of 4 to 5 minutes so it gets nicely up to temperature. That will make the oil basically thinner, so when we then allow the oil to settle and undo the drain plug, the oil will drop out a lot easier. Also, whilst we're dropping the oil out, what we're going to actually be doing is undoing these bolts and taking off this casing so we can get to the oil strainer. There's a little metal mesh strainer. We're going to be taking that out and cleaning that and just checking that, and also the oil spinner. Now to do that, we ideally really need to take off the foot peg section here just by undoing a few bolts. So whilst the bike is warming up, I'm going to be undoing this, moving this out of the way so we can then undo all of the bolts around the casing and then remove the casing to get to the spinner and the oil strainer. Let's do that now. Right, so with the bike's oil warmed up, one of the first things we needed to do was actually get this bike level. Now it doesn't come with a centre stand, so I've actually used the side stand, propped that up with a few pieces of ply and wood, and on the other side I'll show you I have an axle stand underneath the brake lever just to stop the bike from falling over to its right. So let's have a look what I mean. So there you go, I've got a simple axle stand, and actually in its lowest position it's just right and perfect for the foot brake to sit on top of it, and packing out the other side under the side stand, that keeps the bike perfectly upright and level. We need this because once we undo the drain plug and when we undo the cap here, that means the bike's nice and level for all of that oil just to drain out straight into our oil pan. Then I can crack on and do all of these other bits now. So as I said, with the Grom we have these 8mm hex headed bolts all the way around the engine casing, and if we want to just take this off, first we have to remove this because it's just in the way down on this lower bottom corner. There is also the clutch lever bracket here. We need to undo this 8mm here so that that clutch bracket and the cable is no longer attached to the clutch arm lever there, so then when this comes off the two aren't connected. And then there's just a few other things like these brackets on here holding the spark plug lead in place, or the electrical sensor here. Other than that, not a lot really to stop us taking the casing off. Always remove the dipstick as well before taking the engine casing off. But yeah, we'll get on now and we'll undo these bolts just so we can get this out of the way, so then when we undo these we can just take this straight out and all of this isn't in our way. Now I have actually spotted a bit of a flaw in my plan, because to remove this, to take this off, is fairly easily done. We undo this bolt, undo the bolt from the exhaust, and then I think we should be able to at least move that out of the way to get to the corner bolts here. Now the problem is this brake lever here runs and is bolted to the back of this, so if we undo this, we're in effect going to loosen the brake lever and end up with a disaster, because the bike will fall over. So what I am going to have to do is actually not rely on the brake lever and this to hold the bike up, but I do have something else that can get us out of this problem. So now with the bike into the front, what would you call this, front wheel supporter, basically it's a very simple thing. It just either bolts to your garage floor, or as I've got up against the wall, you just ride the bike onto this as you saw, and it just flips up and holds the bike steady. Now this isn't 100% foolproof, so don't think for one moment that the bike couldn't be pushed over if there was enough force, but this will for me hold the bike upright. Now it's nice and level, nothing in the way of here, I can then get on with the job. So just to show you what I'm using, this looks like a pretty extensive tool kit here, but actually this was very cheap. Bought it via eBay and I think it was around 20 something pounds, and it's been one of the best buys I've ever bought when it comes to tools. Also I'll be using a 12mm spanner, a 19mm socket and a 12mm socket. The 19 is for here, 12mm here, 12mm here, and on the back will be our 12mm spanner to hold that nut whilst we undo that, or to hold this whilst we undo the nut. That is hopefully all we'll need to remove this, but we'll see how we get on and I'll let you know what I used. So for here I did use a 19mm socket, but because this is for the swing arm pivot bolt, it's done to a very high torque setting, so I actually needed a lot of leverage, so I used my large torque wrench to break that loose, because this just isn't long enough to give me enough leverage. I was about to use something else to extend that, but this isn't designed for that kind of torque, so I didn't want to be sort of overdoing it with that one, so I used a big one, lots more leverage, lots more torque to be able to crack that loose. So that's our 19mm off, down to our 12mm, that's off nice and easy, not done to a very high torque, and you can already see that this is beginning to become loose now. That's our 12mm bolt, and you can see that that's already loose. The reason, by the way, that is loose and wobbling about there is the exhaust is mounted between two rubbers. It's not firmly mounted, it actually should move on the rubbers are there because of the vibrations, etc. That's just really fixed in a hanging position in place. So our 12mm nut, right, so that's our 19, 12mm and 12mm all done. So this should now move out the way. Now we've just got to be making sure that we don't pull anything, strain anything. There is a bit of resistance there. That I think is from this cable here, which is clipped in to this bit here. So if we could get that out, that would be good. If I pull that too much, I'm pulling this electrical cable too much. I don't think yeah, that's just held in there by a little plastic retainer. That comes out the way, that's nice and easy. Then you've got a bit more. Now what I'm actually going to do is leave that on there, because that's in a good position where I don't have to hang it somewhere else and then there's risk of it damaging and scratching things. Then I can undo these bolts, and then I can see if I can just pull this off and slide it out of the way without actually taking this any further off of here. If not, then I can just pull it a bit more, but for now I'll just leave that in position. So having removed this out of the way, I'm now going to, I've removed that electrical cable, by the way, just out of the retainers, so it's no longer in there. I'm just going to crack off this one and this one, but also crack off this 8mm here to then loosen that cable, so that's out of the clutch part of the system, so then the casing can come off without anything else being attached to that casing. But as I always said already, don't forget to remove the dipstick as well as. Right, so before I undo all the bolts around the engine casing, what I want to do is obviously drain the oil, which has now been basically dropping to the lower part of the engine, having been warmed up. So I've undone the 17mm socket drain plug. On most Japanese bikes you will find that they are 17mm. And it's now easy for me to undo, relatively easy for me to undo with my fingers. And there we go. There goes the oil. Now on this drain plug there is no squash or crush washer. Should be a brass or aluminium washer on this, so the chances are it's still attached to the underside of the engine casing, so I need to make sure I grab that and remove that. So I shall let that oil drain out. I have already taken out the dipstick. Always remove the dipstick or have it very loose, because that helps the airflow and oil flow completely out of the engine. Don't just drop the plug out the bottom and expect all of the oil to come out. You do need a form of circulation, so you need to remove the dipstick as well, ideally, or have it very loose. So as I say, I'll go and have a spot of lunch now and let that drain for a good 20 minutes, half an hour plus, before I undo these bolts on the side. Right, now it's been about half an hour. The oil seems to have stopped dripping, so that's pretty much 95 or whatever % of the oil out of the engine. So I'm going to begin to crack on and undo these. Now what I'm going to do is not undo this one, then this one, then this one, then this one. You need to undo them going across. So undo this one, 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 and so forth. And that's the same way when you tighten up. You don't just undo in a circular motion, because you'll put that casing under tension. Right, so now I've removed all of the bolts, and when I said, by the way, of removing them in a sort of cross pattern, that's just the initial unlocking of them. Once their tension has been removed, you can then undo them and remove them in any sort of order you like. What I've actually done is remove them in the order from 12 o'clock all the way around and set them out, so I know that my first bolt started at 12 o'clock, so I will do that in reverse order. That's just good practice, because some bolts in some engines are different lengths, and you want to put the right one back in the right place. With these bolts, actually they're all exactly the same length, so it's not the end of the world in the order that you do, but of course you wouldn't know that until you remove them. So let's see if we can just wiggle this loose. what we don't want to do is damage the gasket. If we damage the gasket, I need to get another gasket before I can put this back on. If it doesn't just come loose like this, making sure obviously that all of your bolts have been undone. If it doesn't just come off, which it shouldn't do because the gasket should stick, I can just see it coming away now. There we go. And as we can see, I didn't need to take this off completely. That came off. And the gasket's all in good shape, no tears in the gasket, so that's very good. Just show you the inside of that. Got a bit of moisture built up around the dipstick. That's not anything to worry about. That white foaming is just moisture that gets within the oil and then it causes that white foaming. That's just condensation that can build up inside. That's your bearings there. Those bearings go on the spinner to allow the spinner to obviously spin in the engine casing. So that's that. I'm going to put this down on something that doesn't scratch it. And so there we have the inner workings of the lower section of our engine. This is the clutch, the oil spinner. What we are going to do is just undo these bolts here which are Loctited in, and I've seen a good tip to be able to undo that is to put a copper or brass, whatever, penny in between the teeth. It's a soft metal thing. It will lock those teeth, but it won't damage the teeth because that copper penny is obviously softer than the steel of those splines. So we will undo that so we can have a look and check inside the spinner. And under here, I'll just get my pliers. I'll show you the actual filter, for want of a better term, that you'll find in the bottom of this engine. Right, so in the base of the section here of the engine, on this side of the casing, this is where our little filter type thing sits. Now, you need to be careful about which way in it goes. It's slightly tapered on this front face. That's the way it goes in, and I don't know if you can see that. There is a little bit of build up on there, so this needs to be cleaned out just to remove that. So here's our screen. I'm actually going to use WD-40 because with this fine straw I can pretty much blow off any particles through the screen nice and accurately. Just blow them through. Like so. And that's it. Done. So these look like they're 10 mils. And yep, they are. And you can see as I go to try and undo these, that wants to rotate. Now, I probably could put it into gear and that would help a little bit, but I really need to lock this out. So what I need to do is basically lock this into place by putting a penny into those teeth. Then I should be able to undo those bolts. And so there you go with the 2P jammed in there. These aren't done up to really high tension anyway, but I'm just able to undo these now without that rotating. And again, I'm not undoing one bolt at a time. I'm undoing them a little each at a time. So this plate doesn't in effect get bent. They will feel slightly tight because they're done with Loctite. You can see the 2P there locking into the splines. That's working. Don't use anything other than something like a 2P or a 1P, because that's a nice soft metal. So I will set these out 1, 2, 3, so I know which order to put them back in. And this is our plate. And so basically what we want to do is clean out anything in the lower section of this oil spinner. Right, so we've removed our plate. There is a gasket that sits on the face here, but I'm going to leave that in place, because what I want to do is just get in here and remove this. I actually need to get something to put around the rag to then run it around the inside of that to try and pick up as much as I can. So I've got the end of a paintbrush, and I can just use that to just come around inside there, and then you can see I can pick up all of that sludge. Doesn't quite give me the access that I want to get in there and really clean that up, so I'm going to find something a bit smaller. This little gasket here is a bit annoying because I want to take it off, but I don't want to be damaging it when I do, so let's just see if I can very gently remove that. The thing is, it's metallic, so you don't want to bend it, but it does get in the way of you being able to really sort of clean that properly. Well, it kind of does. It just stops you sort of seeing things really how you want to see things. But you also don't want to be damaging it at the same time as simply cleaning this out. But you can see all of the sludge that's coming out of there, so it really is worth doing this. So there you go, that's the inner part of the spinner, the side walls of that spinner. All the sludge has been removed. So remember, this is after 656, sort of 660 odd miles now, and this is when it's due for its first service. Whether or not a Honda dealer would take off the side casing and do everything we've done in the first service, I'm not sure. Maybe they would just drop the oil, maybe they would pull the screen, maybe they would do everything we've done. But that is what I'm doing, and you know, why not? So now I'm in reverse order. I'm going to put the plate back on, the bolts back on. They need a little bit of Loctite to lock them into here, because they're actually not done up with much high torque setting, so they need to go in with a little bit of Loctite so they don't work themselves loose inside. And then we'll just do everything else in reverse order, and then we're done here. We can put the oil back in and all is good. Right, so I'm going to put the 3 bolts back in place here. They are going to be at 9 foot-pounds of torque. I am also going to use some thread locking compound on these, as you should do, because these are in the inner workings of the engine and we do not want those to work loose. And also the outer clutch cover, all of those bolts are also at 9 foot-pounds of torque. Let's get on and do that now. Right, so I've put the thread locking compound on these bolts, and basically I've wound them up in going from each point to each point until they're almost tight. Now I've set my torque wrench here, I don't know if you can see that, but it's at 12 Newton meters, which is 9 foot-pounds of torque. That is the correct setting to go on here. I've got a 2p jammed in underneath, on top to undo and underneath to do up. And again we just continue from point to point, never in just one point all the way. So that's them all done to torque at 12 Newton meters or 9 foot-pounds. Now what we shouldn't do is put all this back together, get the oil in, and then spin this engine up. This is centrifugal. We have got locking compound, liquid locking compound in here, and we need that to go off over 24 hours before that centrifugal force is put into there, because otherwise what you could do is end up throwing some of that compound out into parts where it shouldn't go. We want that locking compound to be in the thread and only in the thread, so we need that to go off over 24 hours, not be running the engine until 24 hours. So that's that part done. Now we just need to get the casing back on and we can get all this sorted out. Right, so I'm about to put the casing back on. The single most important thing to remember before you do that is that you remove your 2p or 1p from underneath here that you've used to lock those splines in. That will hold and you won't see it in there, so don't forget to remove that before by turning this anti-clockwise. That will release that 2p, drop it out. I've cleaned the inside of my casing, so let's get it back on. We need to be careful at this point because we do not want to be damaging the paper gasket. There are dowels that line up. That bracket will want to get in your way, so watch out for that. There are locating dowels that should, there we go, and there we are, we're in and on. We shouldn't have any paper gasket visible, and if we do it's because something's snagged and torn, but that all looks good. In an ideal world you would replace the paper gasket with a brand new one. I am going on the assumption, it's not being a very big high compression high speed engine, that we won't need to do that. We should be fine. There's no damage to this gasket, so we should be good with that. Should there be any little drip or leak from underneath here, then there will be the inevitable regret, and yes, we'll have to replace the paper gasket, but we should be able to get away with not having to do it. But if you do have time, buy the paper gasket. The only problem you might get then is when you remove the old one, it may not come off completely. Then you need to soak it and make sure it's removed without scraping or damaging, you know, either face of the engine block or the actual clutch cover casing. So this is back in place. We're now going to put our bolts back in, do them up like I say, again at 9 Newton meters of torque or 9 foot-pounds of torque, but we do them up from 12 o'clock down to say 7, and then come back up to 10, and then go down to 5, and then go 2 to 9 to 3, etc., and then work your way in. Initially, when you're just doing them up loose, you can sort of wind them in. That's not a problem. It's the moment you start building tension, you want to do it in that formation of going across. Otherwise you can risk distorting slightly the actual casing. And so my last bolt to put in is this one, but this is where we have the clutch bracket, so we need to pull that cable out and we need to engage the cable in to that little locator there. It's easier said than done because this isn't actually, there's not actually much of a space between the end of the cable and the bit where the cable can pass through into the slot. There we go. That's that in place. So we can then locate that back on there, and then I can just wind that back up and that back up. We can set the free play back to how it was earlier as per the manual, up on the actual lever part, because I haven't adjusted these in any way. I've just literally undone them and then put them back in the position they were. Get our bolt in, and again, just like the others, just bring it in so it's just tight, hand tight on here. That locates on a pin, so stops it from rotating as you're doing it up. So that's located there and down up there. Now I can torque all of these. That's in the correct position. That bracket's on there, and then when I've finished, that electric cable will sit in there and sit in there as it came out. So as you can see with this particular torque wrench of mine, it's 13 minus 1 is 12, or 11 plus the 1 is 12 Newton meters, and I should get on now and torque all of those up, and then we'll be ready to put some oil in. Right, so all of these have been tightened up, the clutch cable's in place, the 14mm nut's been done up, that's in place. The electric cable here has been put back into place, so that's all good. Dipstick's in place but not fully tightened up yet. This swing arm pivot bolt nut here, this side, needs to be tightened to 54 Newton meters, or 40 foot-pounds. The lower one here, this 12mm, this one needs to be 31 Newton, or 23 foot-pounds, and this one on the back here for the exhaust mounting nut is at 27 Newton, or 20 foot-pounds. So this is 12mm, 12mm, and then I believe this one was a 19mm. Let's get on and tighten those up now, and then we can put the oil in. Right, so that's all of this done, all of this torqued up. I'll remember to clip the little rear brake little connector there that goes into the rear sets as well, which we took out just so we could loosen all that up and take it away from the actual rear pivot bar or point here. So that's all done. Now we're ready to put the 17mm plug back in. We're going to check that crush washer. If it doesn't look great, we'll replace it with another. We should ideally always replace with new. And we're going to wind that up to the correct torque setting, and then once that's in place we can put the oil back in, and then we're done. So I did put another crush washer on there. I have a selection of washers like this that I've bought. Make sure you get the right size. That's our old washer in there, and then I've just replaced it with another that's of the same internal diameter and about the same external size. It will squash down and seal against the underside of that. Just a tip really, when you do put your bolt in underneath that sump, do it by hand. Get your fingers and thumb under there, and when you get the bolt in place, just, I know it sounds a bit odd, but just anti-clockwise rotate it and you'll feel the thread drop in. then begin to tighten up with your thumb and finger. The reason you do it anti-clockwise first is just so the thread actually sort of locates into place before you then begin to tighten. You'll get a feel for it, and you'll see what I mean when you do it, and it just helps avoid cross-threading any bolts into anything, whether it's into here, which is very, very vitally important, of course, because this is your oil sealing bolt. But for any bolt for that matter, just sort of put it in place anti-clockwise. You'll feel it locate, then begin to do up with your thumb and finger, and if it does up easily, you know it's going in and it's going in correctly. If it begins to tighten too quickly and you've got quite a lot of thread left, you're beginning to cross thread it, so back off very quickly and then try again until you get it right. So that is now been put in with my thumb and finger, done up, thumb and finger tight. I'm now going to do it to the correct torque setting. So again, just like before, in reverse, we're going to use a 17mm socket, and on my torque wrench we want to be setting it to either 18 foot-pounds or 24 Newton meters. So in this case, I'm going to wind it back. So this goes up to 25, and I want to be at 24, so that's 23 there, and on this one is 23 plus 1 or 25 minus 1, so that is 24 Newton meters, 18 foot-pounds to do up our drain plug. I'm going to do that now. So using our owner's manual, it does state in here, when looking for the oil change, that it's 24 Newton meters, 18 foot-pounds for that drain plug, remembering to put preferably a new crush washer back in. And it also states in here that it's 0.9 litres of oil to go back in on an engine oil change. Now, as I've stated, I am using 1 litre, of which we need 0.9 litres of 10W30, not 10W40, 10W30, and this is a part synthetic engine oil, not fully synthetic. Remember, we have a wet clutch in here, and if we use fully synthetic oil we could end up with clutch slip, because we're putting fully synthetic oil onto those clutch plates and they will absorb that fully synthetic oil. Don't be surprised when you're taking your Grom up steep hills, you end up with your clutch slipping. Go with what the manual says, part synthetic, 10W30. Let's get the oil in there now. So there we are, that is it. That is the full oil change done now. Everything's tightened up, torqued down as it should be. 0.9 of a litre of partly synthetic oil in the engine. Everything is good to go. Hope you enjoyed this really in-depth oil change, full service oil change video from Deano's Garage. It'll really help me if you subscribe to my channel, because I'm not there yet with 1,000 subscribers, so you can really help me, please. Hopefully you enjoyed this. There are 78 other videos in Deano's Garage, going way back now to CBR 954s and BMW K100 RSs and all sorts of other bikes, the YZF 750s, the VFRs, etc, etc. Thanks for watching, and there will be other videos as well as this one. We'll be right back.